Silent E does a whole lot more than make the vowel sound long. Today we're going to look at the 7 jobs of silent E. Welcome to episode 16 of Phonics Rules for Teachers and How the Heck to Teach Them. I'm Martha, and today we're going to take a look at the silent E syllable and all of the jobs of silent E. A lot of people know that one of the jobs of silent E is to change the vowel sound from a short vowel sound to a long vowel sound. However, a lot of people stop right there and they don't teach the other 6 jobs. That's right, 6 other jobs of silent E. Today we're going to take a look at all of the different jobs of silent E and how to teach it to your students. You likely already know that one of the jobs of silent E is to make a short vowel sound into a long vowel sound. For example, if we have the word can and we add the silent E, then we have the word cane. This CVCE or VCE spelling pattern is very common in the English language, and students are often taught this spelling pattern in the first year or 2 of school. Some examples of words would be game, Pete, hide, note, and cute. However, that's not the only job of silent E. Let's look at job number 2. Silent E stops words in English from ending in U, I, or V. Words in English generally do not end with these words. While there are some exceptions, typically words that we use that end in U, I, or V are words that we have borrowed from another language, or they are slang words. Typically, when we have a word that ends with one of these letters, we add a silent E to the end to prevent this from happening. Some examples of this are give, have, glue, and pie. Number 3. Silent E makes C and G produce the soft sound. Most of the time when we see an E next to a C or a G, those 2 letters produce their soft sound. C will then represent the S sound and G will then represent the J sound. For example, we see this in words like ice, race, cage, and stage. Number 4, silent E makes TH produce its voiced sound. When we add a silent E to a word that ends with a TH, it then spells its voiced sound. An example of this is breath versus breathe, or bath versus bathe. Number 5, silent E can make an S produce its hard sound. When a silent E is next to the letter S, it often represents the Z sound, such as in wise or raise. This is not always the case, but it can represent this sound. It's important to explain this to your students because there are words where we see an S next to a silent E and the S produces the S sound. However, it's helpful for them to know that if they read it with a S and it doesn't make sense, to give it a try with a Z. Number 6, silent E shows that a word is not plural. Typically, words in English that end with a single S are doing so to show that they are plural. For example, cats, spoons, and trees. For this reason, sometimes we add a silent E after a single S in a word to show that it is not a plural. For example, house, goose, or purse. Number 7, we use silent E to clarify words. Sometimes we add a silent E to a word that is a homophone to show that it is a different word with a different meaning. For example, buy and buy. Now you might be thinking, that is a lot of jobs for silent E. How in the world do I teach them to my students? I've got you covered. Let's take a look at how to teach silent E to your students and in what order I would teach each job. First, before teaching silent E, make sure your students have a firm background knowledge of these concepts. They need to understand open and closed syllables, and they should understand the difference between short vowels and long vowels. Having this background knowledge will make it so much easier for them to understand the silent E syllable. Number 2, start with the most common rule. That's right. While silent E has 7 jobs, you do not need to teach your students all 7 jobs at the same time. In fact, it would be very confusing. So start with the most common rule, which is that adding a silent E to a closed syllable word will make the vowel spell a long vowel sound. Be sure to explain the pattern of this syllable type that they're looking for, CVCE or VCE, and that is the pattern of a silent E syllable. Number 3, compare closed syllables and silent E syllables. When you're introducing silent E, start by writing closed syllable CVC or VC words that can easily be changed into a silent E word. Ask students to read the words. For example, can, kit, hop, and us. Then rewrite the words with a silent E on the end and explain how in this syllable type, the vowel and the silent E work together to spell a long vowel sound. So now you can read the words together: cane, kite, hope, and muse. Comparing these two syllable types will help your students see the pattern of the silent E syllable very clearly. And it builds off the background knowledge that they already have. Number 4, practice, practice, practice. In my last video, I shared 12 strategies that I like to use with any new syllable type, and those are the strategies that I use with a silent E. Things like using my daily sound drill, backwards decoding, decodable text, word mapping, the magic word game, and targeted journal entries. If you would like an in-depth look at all of those different practice strategies, you can see that in my last video where I shared in-depth how to do all of those strategies with your students. Once your students have had time to practice with that first job of silent E, now it's time to introduce some more jobs of silent E. The next job of silent E that I like to introduce is that silent E can change C and G to soft sounds and S to a hard sound. You can explain this by writing some words on the board that follow this pattern. So you could write, for example, the word ice, cage, and wise on the board. Have them take a look at the words. They can even try to pronounce those words with the sounds that they're expecting. So Ike, keg, weiss. And they will quickly see that those don't sound like real words. You can explain to them that when a silent E is next to these letters, it changes their sound from a soft or a hard sound. Have them spend time practicing with this as well before you introduce any more jobs of silent E. The next job of silent E that I like to introduce is that silent E prevents words in English from ending with a U, an I, or a V. There are, in fact, some exceptions to this rule, but most of those words that are exceptions, such as ski or flew or koi, are words that are either shortened words from other words, or they are words that we have borrowed from another language. I do always teach my students that the one exception to this is you and I, because you and I are special. Aww. Here's how you can introduce this. Write the word have on the whiteboard and ask students to read the word. They might read it properly and read the word have if they've already seen that word before. You can then write the word give on the board as well. Have them take a look at those words and ask them, what do they notice is different than the other silent E words they've looked at already? Students will hopefully quickly realize that those vowels are representing a short vowel sound, even though there's a silent E. Then you can introduce that rule that words in English don't typically end in I, U, or V. From there, you can show them words like glue and pie. While words like glue and pie don't follow the CVCE pattern, they still include a silent E that is doing its job. From there, you can practice these types of words with your students until they are comfortable to move on to the next job of silent E. You don't always have to do these in a linear order. You might then move on to vowel teams and then come back to the next job of silent E, and that is totally fine. If your students are just learning silent E, this next rule I would wait until a little later when they've learned some of the spelling patterns that this rule is generally associated with, such as R-controlled or vowel teams. But the next job of silent E to teach your students is the singular rule, and that is that silent E is added to the end of words to prevent them from being confused with plural words. So when you teach your students the ow sound, and they're looking at words like house or mouse, or OO like in goose, or UR as in purse, you can take the time to show them this rule. You can remind them about silent E and say, remember we said silent E has 7 jobs. This is one of the jobs of silent E, to make sure that when we look at the word house, we know we're talking about one house. When we look at the word purse, we know we're talking about one purse. And the 7th job of silent E I would introduce is when you're talking about homophones, or if words that are read the same but are spelled differently come up and they include words with this silent E on the end, for example, buy and buy. You can explain to students that sometimes we add a silent E to words just so we can distinguish them from other words that sound the same but have a different meaning. And finally, be sure to continue to review the silent E syllable type as you're reading and writing together. Silent E is often part of multisyllabic words, so it's really great for students to continue to practice this as the year goes on and as they grow as readers and writers. All of these concepts build upon each other, so the more you practice, the better for your students. There you have it. Those are the 7 jobs of silent E and how to teach them in your classroom. If you have any questions, please feel free to comment below and I'm happy to answer them for you. And if you want resources to go along with all of the tools and strategies that I'm sharing here, you can find them in my How the Heck to Teach It resource, which is linked in the description. Thank you so much for joining me for this week's episode. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Phonics Rules for Teachers and How the Heck to Teach 'em. See you next time.